Welcome to the Executive Insights podcast brought to you by AWS. I'm Clark Rogers, Director of Enterprise Strategy, and I'll be your guide through a series of conversations with security leaders. My guest today is Tom Scholl, Vice President and Distinguished Engineer at AWS. In our discussion today, it's all about network security. We discuss DDoS mitigations, how AWS thinks about threat intelligence and some of the tools we build, such as MadPot that helps disrupt criminal organizations, as well as working at the size and scale of the AWS network. Please enjoy. Tom, thanks so much for joining me on Conversations with Security Leaders.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Could you please describe your role a little bit and then specifically what it is to be a distinguished engineer at AWS?
I work on our infrastructure organization where I primarily focus on our network infrastructure. So that means the network in our data centers, our global backbone, our edge infrastructure, how that connects to and from the internet, as well as deal with things like DDoS defense, as well as the disruption of that, and generally network abuse type issues. And as a distinguished engineer, I think one of the things that's really important is being in the details, right? Mm-hmm. You're not in an ivory tower. Like, you actually have to have and maintain proficiency for your area and your domain, and knowing kind of how things work, being able to go deep, being able to engage at all levels of individual contributors and managers, and being able to understand rapidly what's going on and, make the right recommendations. Working on a variety of areas in terms of product development as well, cross-organization, and engaging with customers as well.
And what about your previous life? So you've been with AWS now about 13 years or so. What about your previous experience made you prepared for this role?
So I worked in the ISP and telecom space for over a decade. And so a lot of that work was involved in building networks and operating them at a global scale. So I think having that kind of knowledge really applied here. In addition to, when you work in that space, when it comes to working and connecting to other internet networks, the internet pairing ecosystem, you build a lot of relationships as well. So understanding kind of how the true internet really works, how networks actually operate with each other, and other things come along with that, like such as security topics. So that really kind of prepared me for addressing the scale and needs on the AWS side.
I'm glad you brought up security. As you know, this is Conversations with Security Leaders, but you're not actually on the security team. You're focused on networking. What about your interest in networking also drew some interest into the security aspects of it? I understand you focus a lot on DDoS protections and other abuses of networks.
And working in the networking space for a long time, building networks, supporting them, one of the things that was always really passionate to me was making sure that as you're building networks, routers, things like that, they have to be secure, right? No one should be able to SSH to your routers. Your network infrastructure has to be rock solid. And that really comes down to having multiple layers of defense. And, over the years, also looking at other areas of internet route security, which has kind of been a thing that's always been an area that needed to be addressed. So it was always something core to me. And it wasn't until at least the last several years ago where I started to look into, the world of DDoS a bit more. I started diving into that area and immersing myself in the world of how DDoS operates and different types of abuse, and really jumping into that ecosystem and learning from others, and then taking that information and applying it to how can we do better.
So working at AWS, has there been anything that has really surprised you about the scale of AWS from a networking perspective?
Yeah, definitely. The network is a lot larger. The diversity in terms of customers, what types of their use cases continually surprises me, right? So we have that infrastructure that people can build upon. And so you see a variety of different use cases. Like anybody else, attacks do come inbound. So we get to see that. We get to see how they grow over time, how they iterate and improve, and we can respond to that in real time, and we have different systems that do that. So with the AWS scale, it definitely gives you a lot more visibility into what sort of threats that are out there.
Can you talk a little bit more about, I guess, some of the motivations around some of the bad actors that are out there who commit DDoS against companies?
There's a variety of reasons, right? So one of them can be focused on gaming, right? Someone wants to disrupt a game, for example. Sometimes it could be e-learning, right? They want to disrupt a classroom. Like during COVID, there was a lot of e-learning going on at that time, and so people would want to, not go to school, as it were.
So pranks.
They're still malicious and they still
Sure.
cause damage, but all the way into, targeting financial institutions institutions, banking, online marketplace type operations, shopping, to just showing off and demonstrating, doing what they call power proofs. So there's a wide variety of why people attack things. And there's an industry called the DDoS-as-a-service industry that basically caters to that and provides that infrastructure for people to go pay and launch attacks.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's they call them booters or stressors, and it's typically you pay in crypto, and you can target and specify where you want to attack. These storefronts will also show off and say, here's snapshots of what we've hit in the past to demonstrate to their customers that this is what you get. And sometimes these folks, they run their own infrastructure. Sometimes they buy and resell API access to others to run it through somebody else. So they're almost like resellers. So it's a whole industry out there. There's several, I'd say dozen of them operating at any given time, and that's where the majority of DDoS attacks really get originated from these storefronts.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into it now. You recently were involved with a group called Anonymous Sudan. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, Anonymous Sudan was another DDoS-as-a-service provider. They were launching attacks and providing access to people to use their infrastructure to launch attacks. And one of the systems that we built internally called MadPot, it's a honeypot service, which has the ability to identify these attacks and actually see the true infrastructure behind it, the actual true sources of it. And they, like many other actors, we identify. It just was yet another kind of DDoS-as-a-service provider that we were able to identify that infrastructure and collaborate with industry peers on in terms of taking that further in terms of mitigation.
You had mentioned MadPot. Is MadPot just an internal service for AWS to use? How do customers benefit from that?
So well, the information that we get out of MadPot is we see a lot of threat actors, different exploitation activity, mass scanning, things like that get collected up by MadPot. And we could take a lot of the data that we collect out of that and we could turn that around into directly helping our customers from a security perspective and availability perspective as well, right? And so what's kind of key about MadPot is it gives us a vantage point to not only give us visibility into denial of service infrastructure that's out there, but it also finds people attempting to do these sorts of activities. We can feed that back into other systems such as WAF, to use it to protect customers, network firewall, as well as some other things that go behind the scenes. Recently, we talked about something called Sonaris, right, which is a system that gets some of its data from MadPot that says, this particular set of resources are scanning all these customer resources. We can go and block that activity, right, without anyone kind of knowing about it. So that MadPot system basically funnels into moving the needle on a variety of different areas when it comes to protecting customers and some using AWS services.
How do systems like MadPot come to fruition inside of AWS? I imagine someone said, hey, there's a problem, here's a way we can fix it, and moving forward?
Sure, yeah. Another engineer who's a principal engineer in my organization, he originally came up with the idea, and it originally was focused on high interactions and capturing threats. And it was actually just a few years ago that he and I were talking, and we said, we could really pivot this to also address DDoS. And to us, we're like, yep, we can add these other ways that we can detect the different pillars of DDoS that are out there. There's several of them that operate in terms of IP spoofing, botnets, application layer 7 request floods. And we were able to quickly iterate. And, it was a case where we didn't have to ask for permission. We just moved forward and did it. And we immediately saw the value of it. And, it was like, great, we've got this data. And then it was like, well, do we just want to see it? It was like, no, let's actually do something. And actually, let's engage externally with networks where a lot of this stuff is originating and directly try to mitigate it upstream. So it's definitely something that was kind of naturally born and evolved, and we've continued to iterate over time, and we will continue to do so.
That's fantastic. And I imagine, even though we can't talk about a lot of them, there are other services in the works that are doing similar things on behalf of customers as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, there's a number of things of, when we look at MadPot, Sonaris, Mithra, we're continuing to improve in how do we leverage different types of technology, for example, using, Gen AI, and how we look at that for some of our deception technology that we use in MadPot of how do you build a better honeypot? How do you make it so, it doesn't look obvious, right? And how do you make these things look very unique and something that would really attract a threat actor to interact with? In addition to other technologies of how do you build a better way to detect different attack signals? How do you kind of get the anomalous, take the signal out of the noise and basically use that to apply better mitigations, for example?
As part of your role as distinguished engineer, the job is to, sort of poke around AWS and say, are you all doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons? When you see something that's not in alignment with what you believe to be the right thing, how do you point that out and have that conversation with the leaders of that team, or maybe it's an individual?
First thing I usually do is actually engage with the team directly, right? And that's really to learn and understand what's going on, right? I just don't want to throw an escalation over the top, right? I actually do want to engage with the team and the senior folks on the team to actually understand what's actually going on, and being able to extract clarity and truth out of that. And then depending on where that needs to go, it's like, okay, this is something where we may have to escalate, bringing data, being clinical about what it is, and then having that conversation with their leadership, and then maybe that expands out further from there. Because a lot of times you find out that, sometimes things got in a particular way. There's a story behind it. Sometimes you have to empathize to understand how things came into a particular area. And so you have to recognize that, right? And sometimes there's a bit of, there's some history there. But a lot of it is, bringing that sort of data out of it, that clarity out of it, being able to explain, hey, this is what I think we should be doing. Here are maybe some of the other options. Here's why we didn't choose those particular options. And then basically kind of pushing that conversation forward. But at the same time, being balanced and pragmatic about it, right? You have to understand, hey, some things can maybe be done in the short term. Some of these things may be real project work that require investment. But it all starts from directly going to the team and then expanding out from there as required.
And understanding that, it's everyone's job to sort of lean into these things.
Yeah, for sure. Certainly as senior technical leaders, that is the expectation, that you do go and look around corners and you find things. And if you see something that doesn't, look right, raising that.
You mentioned escalation. Can you talk a little bit about AWS or Amazon's escalation culture?
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of the things that I found when coming from other companies, coming to AWS, that I really liked a lot, right? The concept of, if you do see something that isn't right, you kind of own it until you find out who actually does, right? And I think that level of escalation, it's not frowned upon, right? If you're escalating for the right reasons, no one will ever, look poorly on that. It's encouraged. And I think, coming from other companies where, you may see the attitude of, that's not my job, that's someone else, or, hey, let it fail. That wasn't the culture here, and I really enjoyed that a lot. And that idea of that, hey, if I see something, I can bring it to the right people, I can ask questions, and we encourage that among folks. And if I don't think the answer is right, eventually taking that further. And, it may end up in a case where it's kind of a have backbone, disagree, and commit. And, because another part I think that also touches on is ownership, right? We, want to push down ownership to the individual teams. And this is another thing where, working at other companies, I've been in the role where the technical decision to use a particular platform or hardware was made outside of the team that actually has to run it at the end of the day. And being able to come to AWS, it was like, you're the one with the pager, you own it. You get to make a lot of those decisions. So I think that kind of is another aspect too. That's a strong part of AWS. But definitely I'd say escalations is something that's, encouraged to get ownership and the right things happening, as well as that concept around ownership of the people who own these things. They get to make the decisions for their space.
And it's not an aspect of, let's get somebody into trouble, right? It's to actually solve the issue for a customer or for the company at large.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you take the people part out of it. It's just like, hey, I think there's an issue here. Like, this doesn't sound right. Like, we need to dig into this, right? And, it could be a variety of different topics that get into it, but it's really coming from, the intent of, I think there's something wrong here, and I want to get more eyes on it. Let's have the discussion and drive it forward, right? And so I think, people are encouraged, and you see that stuff in different places, whether it be a customer issue, a customer escalation, or something that, a metric doesn't look right, people are encouraged to kind of take it to the next level and, okay, this team's running with it. They're on top of it. Like, okay, good. I can disengage, make sure the right things happen. So
that's awesome. So Tom, running networking inside of AWS it's a business within a business. How do you demonstrate and report the value of what you all are doing to senior management?
So I think the main thing is, from wherever that particular area may be, is, does that team have the right tenets, right? Are they thinking about the problem in the right way? And from that, does the team have the right, I would say, goals and metrics and mechanisms in place to really measure that? And so when it comes to security, and particularly these sorts of defensive type solutions, right? Like, how do you prove the value of this thing that's going to be blocking things, right? And so, being able to actually come up with the right mechanisms and metrics to measure that, to say, okay, if we weren't doing this, this would have happened, right? So it's really important, I think, as a team is kind of instantiated, to have the right kind of setup, know who their customers are, making it very clear. So I think it's all about having the right setup there, and being able to show that and iterating on that over time, right? Certainly as the scope expands, are there areas that we need to invest in that we aren't today? And so bringing that, bringing clarity to that too, as well. We have a very document-driven culture. So being able to explain that to where someone can actually understand and actually kind of put the pieces together. They're like, I see what you're bringing here.
You mentioned tenants. Tell me more about tenants.
So tenants really guide a team and tell you, dictate like, this is what's important to us and this is how we operate. And it really is kind of the building blocks of a team to really kind of express, this is what's important to us. This is what we're going to do. This is what we own. And I think having that really crisply defined for a team really steers them down the right course.
That's fantastic. Let's switch gears a little bit to more of the sort of human side of things. Your networking team, and then broadly the AWS security team as well. When you're looking to hire for a new role, an open engineering role in your team, what are you looking for?
So I would say one of the things is definitely, and this kind of comes back to some of our leadership principles, right? So if you look at them, there's really great ones out there. One of the things I really look for is learn and be curious. And I think it's, looking for talent that, wants to ask the deeper question of, hey, why is something the way it is? Why is it, can we do better? I have an idea, how can I proof of concept that? And sort of looking for that sort of like, not settling for the way things are and kind of looking forward, and also kind of willingness to get outside your comfort zone, right? To say, I'm going to immerse myself in something new and try to figure it out. And maybe I could bring a different perspective to it, willing to pull into the work. So I think that's one area that I certainly look for sure.
And once that person is then hired and is on your team, what kind of mentorship opportunities do they typically have? Because again, when Tom joined 13 years ago, it was probably eyes were wide open saying, oh my gosh, AWS is huge. I imagine that's not out of the norm. So how do you help new engineers sort of understand how everything's going on at the scale which they're operating? I
mean, definitely through mentorship and guidance, pointing them to the particular areas of like, whether that's people to talk to say, hey, you're interested in this thing, go talk to this particular person. They're a subject matter expert into it. Or if it's, just even direct kind of, hey, I can explain to you how this works. I think another one is presenting opportunities. So in the back of my head, I can rattle off lots of different things that I've been curious about that, hey, I think these, we need to pull at the thread on this a bit more. So providing kind of opportunities to say, hey, this is an area maybe you take a look at, or here's several. Why don't you kind of lean into one for a bit, and I can help you along the way through that kind of journey. But I think taking that, and then also, at the same time, like as these people are growing and developing, amplifying their voice where you can, right? Like, hey, you found something that let me kind of help steer you and kind of amplify what you're trying to say, or get some additional attention and kind of guidance on communication, things like that.
So it sounds like as a distinguished engineer, not only are you a subject matter expert, but you're also a coach.
Yeah, no, definitely. And not only just for individual contributors, right, but also certainly on the management side as well, right? So I think you have to recognize that you have to deal with both types of sets of folks, and kind of, managers, how they manage the team. And, as a manager's managing team, like, hey, how are you looking at your folks? Like, right. Who's working on what? Are people lined up? Are they set up for success? So you kind of have to do it on both sides, right? And kind of look at managers. And then, that extends into, hey, org design, and how are we thinking about how we organize people? Are we working on the right things? Is the ownership aligned correctly? So it's you're kind of all over the place a bit. Yeah.
Tom, when you're not internally focused, you also have the opportunity to meet with lots of customers. Are there any areas that particularly stand out with you when you're having the networking conversations with customers? Well,
so it's networking. I would say also the security and DDoS one come into it too as well. And so from a networking perspective, we have a number of products that we've launched recently that provide a lot more visibility into network monitoring and availability that definitely encourage customers to take a look at. When it comes from the security, particularly like the DDoS one, is I think it's really important is having a strong front door, right? If you have a presence on the internet, making sure that that how you're exposing your resources, public IP addresses, that you really want to make sure that you have strong front doors there. And that's where, are you using our CDN CloudFront? Do you have WAF enabled? Do you have Shield Advanced, right? Okay, if you're on application load balancer, do you have WAF enabled there? Do you have a good accounting of all your public resources and kind of understand what, do you have the right security controls there? And I think that's really important, particularly since I deal on the DDoS side. There's a lot of things where, customers need to understand that, even in cases where they do use a CDN, hey, your origin happens to live inside of EC2. Is your origin set up to only allow CloudFront to talk to it? Because there are people out there that will know that it's in front of a CDN. They will try to scan and find your resources in EC2 and say, this is the true origin. I'm going to bypass this and go for that thing. You need to follow best practices there to make sure that you're buttoned up completely.
As you know, over the last 18 months or so, generative AI has been in the news all over the place. Where do you see generative AI playing a role in the networking space?
We definitely use it for like productivity improvements there in terms of helping engineers to find really difficult sets of data that's out there that would otherwise take a fair amount of time. And so there's been a number of generative AI tools that have been developed to basically allow people to, like, I need to get at this particular set of data, what kind of queries do I need to run, and I'll go and write the code for them. And so I've seen that, and it's pretty amazing the stuff that it's been able to build, which is like, if you had to do this by hand, take some time. So there's things like that. There's other items like ticket summaries, being able to kind of really summarize things and making it crisp there. But I've seen certainly on the networking, engineering kind of operations side, it basically, be a time reducer and cutting the things down from beginning to end of where different, folks of different proficiency maybe can do it faster because they have the right muscle memory. But I've seen it really kind of equalize and make it easier for people to get at data on the networking side specifically. Mm-hmm. And then for security, as we mentioned, using it for building better honeypots, improving our deception capability to make things really look unique and, something that would really attract attention, as well as, identifying attack signals and coming up with more effective mitigations and kind of getting the signal out of the noise.
Tom, thanks so much for joining me today.
Okay. Thank you for having me.